Chapter 13. Into the boundary sky. The palace was still asleep in all the ways that mattered when the Lumina left without ceremony. No music. No polished farewell on the eastern terrace. No chamberlain with ribbons and arranged blessings. Only a grey dawn, a sealed launch order, Marcus glaring at the harbor officers until the clamps released on time, and the white bulk of the capital shrinking behind us while the city below pretended not to notice one more dangerous thing slipping quietly into the sky. I stood at the port rail and watched Firelia fall away. At that hour the upper island still looked innocent. White roofs silvered by the first thin light. Garden terraces cold with dew. Palace towers pale as carved bone against the sky. Lower down, the workshop quarter lay in darker blocks and lines, smoke only just beginning from the early ovens and resin houses. Somewhere under those roofs, if I narrowed my eyes enough and allowed myself a foolishness I was too tired to fight, I could almost imagine I knew exactly which little strip of street held Master Alara's front shutters. The route lines over the capital had steadied again after the night's sabotage, but I did not trust the calm of them now. Not after the burst lamp. Not after Oren's voice in the route chamber and the way the room had wanted my fear to become useful for them. The scrap of blue-black sealant Vivienne had pressed into my hand sat wrapped in linen inside the inner pocket of my coat. Marcus had taken the witness names from her before dawn and locked them into a separate evidence case with an expression that promised private violence to anyone who let them vanish. That had been enough, for now, to keep me from being turned into a formal problem on paper before departure. It had not been enough to keep the whisper from following me to the ship. I had heard it in the harbor lane while the luminous loading winches sang low in the morning dark. Not loud. Never loud. A palace attendant to a clerk to a route officer to someone farther back where respectable people stood and looked at the ship instead of at me. The old methods. The burst line. The artisan girl. Dangerous. Useful. Unstable. All those words lived too near one another now. The wind off the departing harbor was cold enough to sting my face. I welcomed it. Below us, the lower islands widened into the outer chains. The city's ordered lights thinned. Market roofs gave way to freight platforms to relay towers to smaller inhabited rocks strung along the silver routes like beads on wire. The kingdom always looked most beautiful from above at the moment it stopped pretending people lived evenly inside it. Near the stern, Felix was arguing with a route case. Not a person. A literal route case, long and narrow, strapped twice over because Marcus claimed Felix would fling himself overboard after a flying paper if not prevented by iron. The case held copies from the North Gallery, tower notes, drifting aisle records, and the sealed witness summary from the burst lamp. Felix wanted them closer at hand. Marcus wanted them less available to wind and scholars. Marcus was winning, which was probably why Felix's muttering had reached the level of unflattering theology. Julian came up beside me without the deck creaking enough to warn me first. He did not say anything immediately. He rarely did when words were not necessary. He rested one gloved hand on the rail and looked where I was looking, the capital slipping back into distance, the lower workshop levels paling under the rising dawn, the place where I had once thought the upper islands untouchable simply because they were higher. His coat today was practical, dark and close-cut for the weather ahead. No ceremonial silver except the old clasp at the throat. He looked a little better than he had in the route chamber after the burst lamp, though not fully. The sleeplessness remained at the edges of him. So did the route strain, quieter for now because we were still over familiar lines and not yet in the boundary airspace where the old routes frayed into the unknown. "Are you angry with me?" he asked. The question startled me enough that I turned. He did not seem uncertain often. Not in this way. Yet there it was in the steadiness of his face, not dramatic, not court-practiced, only direct. "For what?" I said. "For not stopping you last night. The burst lamp. The platform. The flash." Oren turning my work into a weapon against me before the light had even finished falling. I looked back toward the city because the alternative was to look too long at him and tell the whole truth, which had become a dangerous habit. If you had stopped me, the line might still have gone and I would only have had different guilt to wear. That is not an answer. It is mine. The wind moved between us. Above the eastern chain, a thin streak of pale gold began to open at the horizon, though the rest of the sky remained cold and strained. Julian's hand tightened once on the rail. I should have seen the trap sooner. I let that sit for a moment before answering. No, I said quietly. You saw it. We all did. We just didn't see all of it. He turned his head then, enough that I could feel his attention fully on me instead of on the shrinking city. It had become a kind of pressure all its own, his attention. Not heavy. Worse. Careful. That doesn't make what happened yours, he said. There it was again. The same refusal he had offered in the rout chamber when I was still full of smoke and shock and everyone else's version of me. I wanted to believe him so badly it almost hurt. Instead, I gave him the only answer I could manage without breaking open before the whole ship. I'm trying. Something softened in his face at that, though the softness held worry under it. We'll stay ahead of him, he said. Not asterisk I asterisk. Asterisk we asterisk. The word settled into me with more force than any reassurance should have been allowed to carry. Before I could answer, Marcus's voice cut across the deck. Stations. The tone changed the ship at once. Crew straightened. Felix gave up his quarrel with the rout case and trapped the chart roll under one arm. The deck hands moved to the forward rigging. The luminous prow lamp, reworked after the sabotage night with enough new housing metal that Marcus had called it an expensive argument with the palace budget, brightened under morning current. I looked ahead. The kingdom was ending. Not abruptly. The mapped outer chains never stopped with dignity. They thinned, broke apart, and became sparse enough that officials could call the rest empty and let themselves sleep. Ahead of us, the last inhabited western islands trailed away into gray distance. Beyond them, the sky changed color. The boundary air did not look like ordinary weather. It was not storm black, not cloud white, not clear. It held the color of pearl ground with ash, streaked through with long, slow bands of darker gray where a broken rout current drifted and dissolved. Sunlight entered it reluctantly and came out thinner on the other side. A person might have called it empty at first glance. Then the eye adjusted and saw too much inside it, faint lines where old routes had once been strong, drifting rocks far out and low, cloud shells moving against the wind instead of with it, and once, at the far edge of vision, a shape too large to be ordinary bird or vessel turning like glass in the half-light. The route line under the lumina narrowed. Not the main western path anymore. The old path. The one the North Gallery had shown only after midnight song and hidden crown work. A thinner silver course riding just under the visible morning, easy to lose if you blinked at the wrong moment. Felix came to the chart stand, unrolled the boundary copies, and weighed them with crystal pins. The last stable public line ends 3 route lengths ahead, he said. After that we are following the gallery path and whatever survives of the outer braid. Meaning we trust the old work, Marcus said. Felix spread both hands. The new work was stolen. That won him a grim look and not correction. Marcus turned to me. Can you keep the path when the visible line drops? I touched the little wrapped circlet in my satchel through the coat pocket. Not because I needed it yet. Because the habit of checking that old silver remained with me now the way some women checked prayer charms. Yes. Then stay near the prow once we cross. Julian was already moving that way. I followed, and the ship passed out of the kingdom I had known all my life. The change did not announce itself with anything dramatic. No thunder. No wall of mist. No sudden impossible cold. Only a pressure shift in the bones, a subtle rawness in the rhythm of the deck under my boots, and a quiet falling away of ordinary sound. The harbor notes of the inner routes vanished. The clean, ordered pull of maintained current disappeared. Even Lumina's own hull hum changed pitch, as if the ship had stopped singing with the kingdom and started listening for something older and much farther apart. The boundary sky opened around us. It was beautiful in the way knives and winter are beautiful. Sharp, unforgiving, difficult to stop looking at once you understood it could kill you without raising its voice. Floating rock shelves drifted in the far gray like old broken teeth. Below us, long belts of cloud moved in separate layers, one dark and dense enough to hide islands under it, another thin and shining where route residue lit the vapor from within. Strange pale vines clung to some of the lower stone fragments, blooming with tiny star-shaped flowers that caught the weak sunlight and flashed once before vanishing again into the gray. Then something swept alongside the ship's port bow, and every thought in my head scattered. A creature no larger than a horse rode the outer current with the ease of silk falling from a hand. At first I thought bird. Then the light changed and I saw the wings. Glass. Not literal glass, no creature would live long in the sky on that, but wings so thin and clear they held the morning like curved panes, each membrane traced with silver veins that flashed when it tilted. Its body was long and narrow, scaled in pale opal color, head fine as an arrow tip. A sky drake, one of the small outer breeds sailors spoke of only when drink and survival both softened them enough to admit wonder. It flew level with us for 3 heartbeats. Then a second one rose under the rail current. Then a third. They did not attack. They watched the ship the way intelligent things watch a candle carried into an old room. Curious, wary, a little offended. Felix, miracle of miracles, went silent. Julian's face changed. Not into court politeness, not into princely composure. Into something I had seen only in fragments before, unguarded awe, the kind that makes even a tired man look young. The lead drake rolled one wing through the light. Silver flashed along the clear span. For one breath it looked made entirely of route line and dawn. Then all 3 veered at once and vanished downward into the cloud belts below. I let out the breath I had forgotten to hold. Marcus did not turn from the prow, but one corner of his mouth shifted in what might have been respect for the beast's restraint. There ahead of the weather, the words landed. The sky beyond the drakes darkened. What had looked earlier like simple gray bands began to show movement in the wrong direction. Not wind shift. Consumption. A black-silver smear dragged across the thin visible route ahead and left the line paler behind it. Then another smear crossed above the first, and between them the old path flickered as if something were biting pieces out of it. Star Eater weather lived differently in the boundary sky. Inside the capital or even along the western chains, it struck like sabotage made natural bursts, distortions, small sudden violence. Out here it behaved more honestly. It ate as it moved, shearing light from the routes and swallowing guidance marks whole. A person could see the hunger in it. Julian's hand found the prow brace and held. The color had not left his face yet, but it would if we got too near. Felix stared from the chart to the sky and back again with the expression of a man who had finally been told that old legends were not only true but structurally significant. The path cuts through the seam. Marcus said, "Can we go around?" Felix swallowed. Not if we want the old ruin before the boundary shifts with noon current. The gallery notation was clear. Asterisk, the boundary does not forgive delay. Asterisk, I hated hearing my mother's hidden world repeated in his scholarly voice. Not because he spoke it wrongly, because it made the danger too real. The prow lamp dimmed once. Marcus swore softly and reset the trim line. The silver path ahead broke into fragments. 3 ship lengths visible, then none. Then one bright pulse at the far edge of the Star Eater smear where the old braid thinned and tried to survive. The lumina slowed. Not from fear, from uncertainty. A ship cannot ride what it cannot see, and the boundary sky had no patience for mortal dignity if one guessed wrong. Marcus looked at Julian. Julian closed his eyes briefly and listened inward. Then he opened them again with the effort already written at the corners. "The path is still there," he said. "Only cut into intervals." Felix stared at the chart. Intervals. I felt it then. Not through the sky first. Through my hands. The memory of the star dial from the north gallery, the hidden crown pattern, the way name and route and pause had all bound together by rhythm rather than command. The Star Eater was cutting the visible line, yes, but not evenly. It was biting through the long stretch and leaving the pauses. The route still existed in pieces that matched the lullaby's breathing. A crown line. Not a straight one. My pulse kicked. "Marcus," I said. He looked over at once. "What?" "I can't hold the full route," I said. "Not through that. But I think I can make the intervals visible." Felix turned so fast he almost dropped the chart pin. "A short path." I looked at him. "Yes." He did not even pretend composure. "Oh, brilliant." Marcus ignored his excitement. "How short?" I stared at the broken silver flicker ahead, feeling for the rhythm under it. "I don't know. A few lengths. Maybe less." Julian had already understood the rest. Enough to cross from one surviving segment to the next. "Yes." Marcus measured the storm smear, the route fragments, the ship beneath his hands. "Then do it. No council room. No noble witnesses. No Orin arranging words around my throat. Only the boundary sky, a hungry weather front, a ship full of people I could not bear to fail, and the old work in my hands asking whether I would answer." I moved to the small forward work bracket built beside the prow chart post. Not a full table. Only a narrow rail shelf used for emergency line knots and rapid lamp adjustments. I emptied my pocket satchel onto it, silver thread, 2 clips of preserved white wind blooms from the tower, a pinch of starglass dust, the wrapped little circlet, my mother's brass scissors. The ship shuddered under a gust. The path ahead vanished completely. "Cora," Julian said. I looked at him. "Take only the next stretch," he said. Not the whole crossing. There it was again. Not doubt. Protection without condescension. He knew I would try too much if I saw the ship needing more than I could give. "I know," I said. I meant it. Mostly. My fingers began moving. This was not a full crown. It could not be. There was no head for it, no person to wear it, no time for beauty beyond function. I bound silver across the preserved blooms in 3 quick loops, set the underhook crossing loose enough to breathe, then cut the thread and rewove it not into a ring but into a narrow open crescent meant to catch and throw line rather than hold it. The binding mattered more than the flowers. The flowers mattered more than the men who thought them decoration ever understood. Under. Across. Pause. Leave room. Turn back. The little crescent shook in my fingers with the vibration of the ship. I tied one side of it to the prow brace, the other to the navigator pin beneath the failing lamp line. Then I closed my eyes and hummed the opening phrase of the lullaby. Nothing happened. The route ahead remained broken. Felix made a strangled noise and Marcus snapped at him to breathe like a man with lungs. I ignored both. Something in the binding was wrong. Not enough give. I had made it too much like a crown and not enough like a bridge. The bridge. Of course. I remembered the burst lamp. The way the sealed housing had trapped the current and forced it back. I remembered the lumina's first repair where the line held only when I let the silver travel under tension instead of flattening it. And I remembered Glassmere's old brace pattern beneath the newer office mesh, the underhook crossings laid not to trap but to distribute. I cut one loop loose, rewove it open, under, not over. The moment the silver breathed, the prow crescent lit. Not all of it, only the inner crossing, then the smallest petal point, then the whole bound shape in a clean narrow pulse that leapt off the prow and into the air ahead. A short strip of silver route appeared, 5 ship lengths. No more. A blade-thin road laid over the gray where nothing had been visible a heartbeat earlier. Marcus moved instantly. Hold her there. The deckhands answered and the Lumina surged forward onto the path. The Star Eater smear slid toward us from portside, black, silver, and hungry. The visible strip ahead was already thinning. I could feel it fraying from the silver in my hands, pulling apart one breath at a time. Next, Marcus barked. I had not known there would be a next. My hands knew before my mind did. I rewove the loosened loop tighter this time, shifted the crescent angle, hummed the second phrase instead of repeating the first, and threw the pulse farther. Another short road lit. Then another. Each one only a few lengths. Each one enough for the Lumina to leap and catch the next surviving interval in the boundary line. The ship no longer felt like it was sailing. It felt like it was stepping across the dark on things I made too quickly to name. Fear vanished. Not entirely. It remained in the body, cold in the gut, sharp at the base of the spine, but it had no room to rule while my fingers worked and the ship answered. Something cleaner took its place. Not confidence, not yet. Handhold. The fierce, bright knowledge that I was not only being carried through this world, I was shaping a road inside it. The third short path held longer than the first two. The fourth nearly failed because the Star Eater wind cut sideways through the pause and dragged half the silver line off before the Luminer reached it. I rewove faster, changed the crossing angle, let the route breathe wider instead of narrower. The fifth came out stronger. Felix was laughing now, breathless and appalled, every word to Marcus sounding like blasphemy made technical. She's doing it by interval compensation. She's doing it by not killing us, Marcus said. Keep the chart ready. Julian stood beside the prow brace with one hand white-knuckled on the rail. He was listening to the route as I threw each short line. Not interfering. Not daring to. But on the sixth pulse, when the Star Eater smear bit hard across the visible fragment ahead and my little silver crescent dimmed too fast for the ship to catch it, he reached out and laid his hand over the navigator pin. The effect hit the ship like breath returning after a choke. The short path I had cast widened. Not by much. Only enough. 5 lengths became 10. The silver line thickened from thread to narrow road. The Star Eater sheer at the edge shivered and peeled back rather than eating through cleanly. The Lumina surged over it and out of the worst of the storm seam in one long gliding rise. My hands stopped. Not because the work ended, because I finally understood the shape of the truth I had only half feared. Alone, I could throw short safety. A step, a breath, a ship length, then another. With him, the line deepened. The boundary sky opened ahead of us for the first time since the smear closed over the route. A strip of pale air showed through. Broken stone glimmered in the distance. The Storm Eater dragged behind us with a hiss like silk burning. The deck fell into sudden sound all at once. Crew shouting route corrections. Felix swearing delightfully. Marcus issuing half a dozen orders in the same steady tone he used for breakfast. Someone laughing outright from relief. I still stood at the work bracket with my fingers wrapped around cut silver and dead flower stems, breathing too hard, my pulse beating in the bridge of my nose. Julian lifted his hand from the navigator pin. The widened path held for one final length before narrowing again to ordinary boundary thread. He looked at me. The force of it nearly drove the rest of the air from my lungs. Not because he seemed princely, because he did not. The route's strain had paled him again. The wind had loosened his hair. There was effort in the set of his mouth. Yet the expression in his eyes was so open with astonishment and something warmer beneath it that for a heartbeat I wanted the whole sky to stop moving so I could survive looking at him properly. Marcus's voice reached us through the aftershock. How far can you hold it alone? I swallowed and made myself answer. Short intervals only. A few lengths. It phrased too fast. With support. I looked at Julian. He looked back at me. Felix, to his great credit, understood at once and had the decency not to sound smug. Paired resonance broadens the cast. Marcus grunted. Good. I hate relying on miracles without notes. The strange joy of it hit me then. Not ballroom joy. Not the painful fragile thing that had risen when Julian asked for the first dance. Something rougher and brighter. I had done it. Not perfectly. Not grandly. But truly. The boundary sky had tried to close. I had given the ship road enough to answer. The happiness lasted exactly long enough for me to realize what that meant. If I could do this, if he and I together could widen even a short path through a Star Eater's seam, then the final lock on the great route was no longer abstract danger. It was real, reachable, and the people who had stolen the charts would understand that too, if they got close enough to the same conclusion. Fear came back with that thought. Not the old helpless kind. The newer one. The kind that arrives when the thing you most wanted suddenly becomes possible and therefore easy to lose. Ruin to starboard front. One of the deckhands shouted. I looked up. The boundary ruin rose out of the gray in fractured stages. At first it seemed part of the floating stone belts ahead, another broken outcropping, another shard left hanging where older routes had once had use for it. Then the lines resolved. Not natural rock. Built stone or once built, a ringed structure suspended over the drop on a platform so ancient the current itself appeared to have forgotten whether it should still carry the weight. 2 arched towers flanked a central causeway broken at the far end. What remained of the roof above the inner chamber had long since fallen away, leaving only skeletal ribs of old metal and pale stone open to the sky. Wind-stripped banners or route cloths hung in tatters from one side, silver enough to flash and vanish between gusts. It should not still have been there. That seemed true of too many old things lately. Marcus drew the ship off the main gray seam and into the ruin's lee. Without the Star Eater on us directly, the boundary air smoothed enough for proper approach, though the currents still rolled under the hull like big sleeping creatures turning over. As we closed, the ruin's details sharpened. The outer platform had once been circular and whole. Now one quarter hung open where the supporting edge had dropped away into cloud. The central causeway led inward through 2 broken arches carved with the same 4-point and pedal logic as Glassmere and the drifting aisle, though stripped here to bare severity. No flowers. No court softness. This place had been built for the boundary itself, warning, observation, and closure. Felix leaned over the chart stand so far Marcus would normally have threatened him. This time he only said, "If you fall now, I won't circle back." Cruel, Felix breathed. Understandable. The Lumina docked against what remained of an outer mooring brace with all the elegance of a cautious knife set down beside something old and brittle. Crew lines went out. Marcus tested the platform stability himself before letting anyone cross. The boundary ruin smelled of cold mineral dust and long-burned current. No life sound greeted us beyond the wind. No birds nested in the arches. No vines softened the broken stone. Even the boundary flowers I had seen on other drifting rocks gave this place distance, as if the ruin retained some old purpose sharp enough to keep softer things away. We crossed the outer platform in careful sequence. Marcus first. Then one deckhand and Felix under strict supervision. Julian and I together because at this point any old structure worth surviving long enough to matter seemed to insist on that pattern. The stone underfoot was pale, almost white where weather had stripped it clean, and veined with silver lines so worn they showed only when the light caught low. At the center of the first arch lay a carved band of script. Felix dropped to one knee before Marcus could stop him. The script was older than the drifting aisle basin marks and more severe in its hand. Not a domestic record. public instruction cut in stone for those who reached this far and needed to understand what they were standing in. Julian crouched beside the carving. I did too. The same half-knowing rose through me again, that strange reading of shape before word. This time it came with resistance, as if the phrase were not meant to comfort. The great route closes above the capital. I stared. Felix looked up so quickly he almost struck the broken arch with his head. Above the capital. Julian read the line again, slower. Not here. The meaning shifted under my ribs like a blade turned by hand. The final key lay in the boundary sky, yes. But not as a door built at the edge of the world for us to step through here and be done. This ruin was not the lock. It was the boundary marker. The place where the old line told those who reached it that the true closing point of the great route sat above Violia itself. Above the capital. Over the palace. Over the city that had erased my bloodline and still wore its routes like inheritance. I stood too fast and the wind hit my face like cold truth. That means the last opening is over the place they least expect to lose control. Felix, pale with sudden excitement and dread both, said, or the place they most wanted to hide it. If the great route closed above the capital after the cut, then every current ceremonial route line may be built under the sealed crown path without knowing. Marcus's expression had darkened by degrees since we landed. Now it went hard enough to chip. So the boundary key points home, he said. Julian looked beyond the arch, through the broken causeway to the inner platform where some deeper chamber half hid under fallen ribs. Wind moved there in rough cross-currents, carrying the hiss of outer weather through the gaps. The ruin still has more, he said. He was right. The line in the stone was not the end. A second band ran inward along the causeway, half buried under grit. And beyond it, under the remaining metal ribs, something faintly silver pulsed in slow intervals as if the ruin had not finished speaking. We crossed the causeway. The middle section had cracked but not fallen, one side leaning enough to remind every step what waited below. Boundary cloud moved under the gaps in great slow belts. The old silver seam lines in the paving flared once as Julian and I passed over them together, then dimmed again. The inner platform held the remains of a central apparatus. Not a full station. Not a record basin. Something between an observatory and a gate brace. 3 upright stone arms surrounded a circular floor ring. All had been broken at the upper third and now leaned inward as if trying to remember the shape they once made together. The floor ring still held its silver channels. At the center, partly buried under fallen rib metal, lay a narrow black crystal pillar no longer upright enough to function cleanly but not fully dead either. The faint pulse I had seen from outside came from within it. Felix circled left. Marcus circled right. The deckhand stayed at the arch with one hand on the line hook. Julian came to stand beside me at the ring. The wind dropped for one impossible breath. The whole ruin went still. Then the black crystal brightened from within, and a line of old silver script rose around the ring's inner edge like light summoned through stone. Not a full record. Only a warning. Or perhaps a reminder. Crown line below. Boundary line beyond. Seal closes where star and city meet. The capital. Again. I looked at Julian. He had gone pale, but not from route pain this time. From recognition. From the shape of the trap and the road both tightening around the same point. We have to take this back, I said. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. I should have been reassured. Instead, the fear in me sharpened once more. Because taking it back meant returning not with theory or rumor, but with truth that sat directly over the capital's pride and therefore directly under Oren's appetite. And because standing beside me in that boundary ruin, with old silver light moving over his face and the wind gone briefly quiet around us, Julian looked more unguarded than I had ever seen him under palace ceilings. He turned toward me. Without the gale, without the alarms, without the council benches and noble arithmetic and every witness trying to make us smaller, his voice seemed to touch the air differently. Without you, he said, I could not have come this far. The words went through me with almost physical force. Not asterisk, we would have had a harder journey asterisk. Not asterisk, your skill has been useful asterisk. Not any of the safe, formal things a prince could say to a woman he respected while preserving distance. He meant exactly what he said. The route, the boundary sky, the drifting isle, the gallery, the storm path, this ruin, all of it. My whole body seemed suddenly too full of blood and fear and impossible happiness to remain upright with any dignity. I wanted to answer with something equally clean. Instead, all I had were truths too large and too dangerous for a boundary ruin and a thin old causeway and one breath of stillness. So I gave him the plainest one I could manage. I'm glad I did. His eyes changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for grandeur. Only enough that the old silver light between us seemed to deepen and the whole boundary sky narrowed for one terrible, beautiful heartbeat to the exact space where he stood. Then the ruin groaned. The sound came up through the floor ring under our boots, low and structural, the voice of something ancient discovering that the weight on it had become too much or that a support hidden somewhere beyond sight had finally failed. The black crystal flared white. Marcus shouted. The left-hand stone arm cracked down the middle. Felix spun. The deckhand at the arch swore and threw himself backward. Wind hit the platform all at once as if the boundary sky had taken offense at the stillness and come back hungry. The central ring split under the old script in a line bright with silver fire. Back! Marcus roared. The inner platform dropped by a handspan. Julian caught my arm before the tilt threw me into the broken crystal pillar. Stone screamed. One of the metal roof ribs tore free and came down across the far side of the ring in a spray of sparks and old silver dust. The boundary ruin was collapsing. Chapter 14. The door that opened only to resonance. The floor broke under us with a sound like the sky biting through bone. Julian's hand locked around my arm so hard I felt the grip through coat and sleeve, and then the inner platform dropped. Not a clean fall. A wrenching half-collapse, half-release. The cracked silver ring under our feet split along the old seam and pitched inward while the broken stone arms above it tore free in a rain of grit and white sparks. I hit the edge of the ring, slammed my shoulder against Julian's chest, and heard Marcus shout something from the far side that the collapsing ruin swallowed whole. The black crystal pillar burst with a pulse of blinding white. Then the whole center gave way. For one impossible heartbeat, there was nothing under us but cold light and falling stone. Then the ring caught. Not by chance. A lower mechanism, buried under the ruin and asleep for who knew how many years, seized the broken inner circle in a screaming shudder and held it suspended on 3 surviving guide spines. The motion snapped through my bones hard enough to tear a cry out of me. Dust exploded upward. Metal ribs crashed around us. One of the old roof braces struck the edge of the ring and skidded away into the dark below with a long descending shriek. When the shaking stopped, I was on my knees. Julian still had my arm. Not because he had not let go. Because if he had, I would have gone over the edge. The broken ring now hung tilted inside the ruin's opened heart, lowered perhaps 2 body lengths beneath the original platform and held by thin silver-lit supports running into blackness. Above us, through clouds of dust and fractured ribs, I could see Marcus at the broken edge, Felix on one knee behind him, and the deckhand throwing himself flat to keep from sliding after us. Cora! Marcus's voice came down sharp through the dust. Report. I coughed, dragged air back into my chest, and made myself speak. Alive. Julian's grip loosened only enough to let blood return to my fingers. So am I. Above, Felix made a sound that might have been prayer in a less scholarly language. The ring groaned beneath us. Not failing. Settling. The old guide supports along its underside had lit in narrow silver lines, holding the dropped platform at a brutal angle over a lower chamber cut into the ruin's core. The collapse had split the floor open around us and exposed something far older than the broken boundary apparatus above. A chamber wall. A sealed wall. Directly before us, half obscured by hanging dust and the slant of the ring, stood a circular door set into pale stone. Its surface bore no handle, no visible lock, only a 4-point star at the center and 2 long curving silver bands that ran out from it like route lines seeking each other. Not decoration. Not after everything else. Julian pushed himself upright first and hauled me with him before I could decide whether my legs were still mine. I steadied on the broken ring's inner lip and looked up. Marcus had already thrown himself prone at the platform edge and was reaching for us with one arm while the deckhand anchored his belt line. "Can you climb?" he shouted. I looked at the distance. No. The original platform edge above us had shattered badly. What remained was too far, too unstable, and shedding stone dust in irregular slips. Even if Marcus dropped us a rope, the ring under our feet was tilted and moving just enough that climbing while more of the ruin shifted overhead would be a fast way to die loudly. Julian saw the answer in my face before I gave it. "Not safely," he called. Marcus swore with deep professional feeling. Then hold position while I, the ruin, answered for him. A second crack tore through the upper causeway. The left arch above us split down its spine. 3 chunks of weathered stone fell into the gap between the broken platform and the lowered ring, smashing one silver support line and making the whole suspended circle lurch. I slammed sideways. Julian caught me again. Above, Felix vanished from sight as Marcus dragged him backward away from the shearing edge. When the dust cleared enough to see, the path back had become worse than impossible. The gap had widened. The only stable line between the upper ruin and our lowered ring now ran through the sealed chamber wall in front of us. Marcus knew it at the same moment I did. His face appeared once more through the shattered edge, dirt-caked and furious. "Find another exit. We'll hold the upper brace as long as we can." Felix leaned over his shoulder before Marcus could stop him. "The guide supports are active. If that chamber is what I think it is, there may be a lower release path." Marcus shoved him back again with one hand. "Then pray they can open it." The dust around us drifted thinner. The old door stood silent in the exposed lower wall, untouched by the collapse except for a thin line of grit across its lower rim. The central 4-point star had begun to glow very faintly, as if the mechanism had noticed not the ruin above but the people now stranded before it. Julian let go of my arm only when he was certain I could stand without pitching into the open gap. "You're hurt," he said. It was not a question. My shoulder throbbed where I'd struck the ring edge. My knees would bruise by evening if I lived to see evening. There was grit in my mouth and hair and coat, and one palm had been sliced by sharp edge somewhere in the fall. "So are you?" I said. A line of blood ran through the soot at his temple where flying stone must have caught him. The right shoulder of his coat had torn. More worrying was the way he held himself too carefully through the lurching aftershock, as if the raw shock of the collapsing boundary apparatus was hitting him under the skin in places no one could bandage. He turned toward the door. "Can you feel it?" he asked. I closed my eyes for one breath. The answer came at once. Not danger. Recognition. The same clean old answer as Glassmere's hidden stair and the drifting aisle basin, only stronger and narrower. This chamber had not been opened by weather, time, or office theft. It had remained sealed because it was meant to open only under the right call. "Yes," I said. Julian nodded once. Above us, Marcus shouted for caution to the deckhand and then something about a side brace to Felix, but the words had grown distant already. Not because the ruin no longer mattered. Because the room in front of us was beginning to pull. We crossed the broken ring together. The slanted stone underfoot shifted small dust avalanches toward the gap where the platform had fallen away. I kept one hand on the inner silver support line and the other wrapped around the satchel strap across my shoulder. Inside it, the little wrapped circlet from the storm tower knocked against my hip, warm now in a way it had not been moments ago. When we reached the door, the silver bands on its face brightened. Julian stood on the right. I stood on the left. The arrangement was so familiar now it frightened me. He looked at the star, then at me. The same pattern. Yes. We did not speak of the alternative. There was none. I took the little circlet from my satchel and unwrapped it. The wind looms had dried at the edges. The silver inner turns still held. It had survived the tower, the gallery, the boundary crossing, and the ruin collapse, as if refusing to admit that temporary things are allowed to die in peace. I pressed it lightly to the left silver band on the door. Nothing. Then Julian laid his palm over the right band. The star flared white. The reaction hit through the stone beneath our boots and up my spine in a clean, sharp pulse. The two silver bands on the door lit from the outer edges inward, racing toward the center star. The old circlet in my hand warmed almost painfully. Somewhere inside the wall, hidden mechanisms woke with a long, low sound like a held breath finally being released. The door did not split at once. It listened first. The star brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again in rhythm, not random rhythm. Pulse and pause. A question asked and answered. The same old logic as the route song bands, the hidden name work in the gallery, the underhook crossing in every place the old system had survived. Trust first. Response second. Opening only after a chord. Julian's hand had gone rigid against the band. I looked at him. The route strain was hitting him again. I could see it in the tightened jaw and the line at the side of his mouth. Not from damage this time. From effort. The old mechanism was asking his line to answer at depth, and though it hurt less than the forced systems did, it still cost. Without thinking, I shifted the circlet from the door to the space between our hands, lifted my free hand, and pressed my palm over his where it lay against the silver band. The effect was immediate. The strain in the star pattern resolved. The pulsing ceased its uncertain question. The whole door lit cleanly from center to edge. Julian's breath caught. Mine did too. The circular panel dissolved into silver light and withdrew soundlessly into the wall. Cold air moved over us from the chamber beyond, carrying the scent of old metal, stone dust, and something stranger under it, ozone perhaps, but softer, like rain held in silver bowls. The room inside was not large. That made it more terrible. Not because smallness is frightening by itself, but because this chamber had been built by people who expected their truth to do its work without needing size to impress. It was almost austere after the palace gallery and the drifting aisle basin hall. Smooth pale walls. A low domed ceiling crossed by 4 silver route arcs. At the center stood a standing ring of black crystal no taller than my shoulder, set upright in a cradle of pale stone. Behind it, cut directly into the rear wall, lay a relief map of the kingdom Vyrlia and its chains, the western braids, the drifting isle, the boundary sky, and above the whole capital a larger 4-point crown mark unlike any current route symbol. The Great Route. Even half buried in old cut stone, I knew it instantly. Felix would have screamed with joy if Marcus had not strangled him first. The chamber's central black crystal ring held no memory basin light, no fluid silver, no decorative polish, only a narrow seam of white burning deep within it like a live cut in midnight. The moment we stepped over the threshold, the white seam widened. Words appeared in the air above the ring, not written in ink, not carved in stone. Memory script hung in silver as if the room itself had stored language in suspension until the right 2 lines stood before it. Crown line received. Woven line received. Then another line. Command path denied. Accord path recognized. I stared. Julian took 1 slow step forward. The relief map behind the ring answered him by brightening at the old route nodes. Not the current palace routes. The older ones. Glasmer. The drifting isle. The watchtower. the boundary ruin. And then, higher, above the carved capital itself, the crown-shaped seal mark at the center of the great route. Julian's voice came out low. It knew the command path. The black crystal ring lit further, and the suspended script answered. It remembers the wound. Pain moved through me like an echo. The cut record. The forced command lines. The old basin screaming when the later office blade entered it. Felix had said modern route systems treated control as virtue. The old rooms had all said something else. Now, here at the boundary's hidden core, the truth stood plain enough to shame a kingdom. The crystal ring filled with light. Memory rose around us. Not people this time. Mechanism first. The relief map deepened and expanded into a floating image over the ring. The kingdom's route structure appeared in its original shape, braided lines crossing the islands not as rigid channels but as living exchanges. Major paths thickened and thinned where traffic and weather shifted. Harmonizer nodes opened and narrowed in answer to line stress. At each key junction 2 marks appeared, together a 4-point star for the royal line and a petal crown form for the woven line. The routes did not run under one or the other. They were held between. A voice entered the room. Not my mother's, not one of the basin women exactly. Something older and more formal, perhaps from the first instruction layer built into the system itself. The Sky Road is not ruled. It is negotiated. The floating route map changed. A hand in royal colors laid a command rod against one section of the great route without the second answering mark present. The line took, yes, but the light around it turned hard and thin, pulled too tight. The neighboring nodes dimmed. One outer junction cracked under the pressure, and the command-fed line continued only by drawing more force downward from the crown mark source. Julian's hand went to the edge of the crystal ring without touching it. The voice continued. Single-line command will hold only by taking from the collar. My mouth went dry. The map showed it plainly now. The royal line alone could force a route open if it had enough inherited affinity, but the cost returned directly into the body or blood carrying the command. No accord. No distribution. No answer. Only strain fed inward through the collar until the route either closed or the collar failed. The route pain. The bell inside the bones. The years of the crown taking from him because the woven side had been cut away and the kingdom chose command over answer. I looked at Julian. His face had gone still in the most dangerous way yet. Not because he had become calm. Because the truth had just reached the oldest hurt in him and found it already there. He had been living the distortion. His whole life. The voice moved on without mercy. The great route was formed to open by a cord at the crown of the capital. The royal line calls. The woven line answers. The vow between them stabilizes passage. The floating map shifted to show the capital viewed from above. Over the palace island and the surrounding city, the great route seal mark unfolded not in the boundary sky, not in some unreachable outer gate, but above Firelia itself. A hidden crown of silver roads folded shut over the capital's air. Smaller public routes ran beneath it, unaware, like everyday streets under a buried royal road no one remembered how to lift. I felt suddenly, violently, the scale of what had been hidden. Not only that the Star Weavers had been erased. Not only that my bloodline had been cut out. The entire kingdom had been living under a sealed crown route whose true opening required the very line the court had helped bury. The image darkened. The great accident came next. Nothing softened it. No court version prettied it into tragedy without blame. The room showed us the truth in sequence. A royal council chamber. A route steward line pressing for crown-only emergency activation. The woven representatives refusing. Storm pressure on outer lines. The great route partially sealed already due to some earlier fracture at the capital crown point. Then the decision, command without accord. The floating image of the great route flared white-hot. Too hard. Too fast. The crown line over the capital took the force first, then shoved it outward without the woven answer to distribute the strain. Notes cracked. The west braids tore. A vessel over the outer chains dropped into storm dark. A whole harmonizer sequence at the drifting isle dimmed and then failed in 2 sections. The image did not linger over corpses. It did not need to. The route structure itself screamed enough. The voice returned, colder now. What was cut from the road was laid upon the weavers. What was taken by command was named their failure. Pain moved through me in a way that had nothing to do with my own bloodline and everything to do with seeing a lie built so cleanly over dead and broken work. Julian's hand had tightened into a fist at his side. The suspended script changed again. After the accident, the partial command path was retained for political continuity. Stewardship authority enforced crown-only route administration. The woven line was removed from public record. The great route was sealed above the capital and named inaccessible. I closed my eyes for a moment because seeing it written that plainly hurt in a different way than the drifting isle basin had. There, grief had reached me through family and erasure. Here the violence was systemic, naked, and engineered. Not accident followed by fear. Accident followed by decision. They broke the road and then chose the version of the break that kept them in charge. When I looked up, the floating script had shifted one final time. A full great route opening by crown line alone may be forced. Cost returns to the caller until line or life is spent. The chamber went silent after that. Not because the mechanism had more to say and paused for effect. Because it was done. Because the truth no longer needed emphasis. Julian did not move. He stood before the crystal ring with the old route map burning pale across his face and looked, for one terrible heartbeat, more alone than he had in the ballroom, in the council chamber, or even in the storm tower when pain rang through his body and he let me hold his hands. This cut deeper. Not present suffering alone. Pattern. Purpose. The knowledge that the kingdom had designed his pain into continuity and called that stability. I stepped to him before thought could begin arguing about dignity. Julian. He turned his head. The look in his eyes nearly undid me. Not because it was broken. Because it was too controlled around something that deserved to break. All this time, he said quietly, they let the crown line carry what should never have belonged to it alone. Anger came into me then, clean and impossible to mistake. Yes. Not at him. Never at him. At the rooms. The ministers. The old stewardship line. The way Orrin used words like governability and caution with clean hands while this lived under everything. Julian looked back at the ring. If the great route seal fails under pressure and I try to force it alone, the unfinished line and the chamber completed it for us. Line or life is spent. The answer sat between us like a blade neither could step around. No, I said. The word came out harder than I intended and not nearly hard enough for what I meant. He looked at me again. I stepped closer until the old silver light from the ring crossed both of us the same way. You are not opening anything alone. The room behind my voice shook with all the other things I was not saying. Not if the kingdom asks it. Not if Orrin corners you. Not if the capital falls and every noble in the palace calls it duty. Not if you believe for one breath that your life is an acceptable weight to lay under the road because the crown trained you to think so. Julian's face changed. The hurt in it did not vanish. But something steadier answered through it. Something had been building between us for too long, and fear was no longer enough to keep it unnamed. I know, he said. This time I believed him. Not because he had no self-sacrificing instincts left. Because the old rooms had already made too much clear between us for him to lie cleanly anymore. The crystal ring pulsed once, drawing our attention back to the chamber's final offering. The relief map behind it no longer showed the great route seal above the capital alone. A second image layered over it, the hidden crown pattern from the north gallery, now scaled larger and set against the capital's air. The inner turns where name-bearing work would matter. The outer interval marks where route song and vow would align. The exact point where the woven crown logic and the royal route mark met. The final opening was not only a place. It was a structure of relation. Name-bearing work at the capital crown point. Royal call. Woven answer. Chord spoken. There it was. Everything narrowing. Not just into danger, but into us. I could not breathe properly for a moment. The hidden crown from the gallery. The vow completion line. The old rooms all refusing command and requiring answer. The route strength that widened when Julian touched the navigator pin while I cast the short path. The way the crystal ring spoke of royal call and woven answer not as metaphor, not as pageantry, but as mechanism. No wonder the court had turned marriage into politics. No wonder Oren wanted stability dressed in bloodline and arrangement. He might not know the whole shape of the old opening, but he knew enough to fear anything that let royal line and erased woven line meet on terms he did not control. The chamber dimmed slightly. Not closing. Waiting. Marcus's voice came faintly through the broken ring chamber behind us. The collapse above had not settled fully. He called my name, then Julian's, carrying the hard edge of a man who would give us exactly 2 more breaths before coming through stone for us if he had to. Julian exhaled slowly. We have to go. Yes. The oldest, dullest tragedy of every true thing I had learned lately, that it always had to stop just when it became unbearable enough to matter most. I looked at the crystal ring one last time. The white seam in its heart had narrowed. The map relief behind it still held the great route crown over Violia. The warning remained. Life or line. No crown, only salvation. No command without cost. No opening without accord. My gaze dropped to my hands. Soot from the burst lamp still shadowed one sleeve. Fine silver dust from the boundary ruin clung to the cuff. Under the nails of my right hand, a little crescent of old map grit remained from the gallery recess. My hands looked exactly like themselves, and nothing like the hands I had thought I owned before the harbor night. The woven line. Balrog's blood. Starweaver work hidden by hand because name must be buried. The old crown pattern waiting for a bound name and a spoken accord. I closed my fingers into a fist. When I turned back to Julian, he was already watching me. Not the chamber. Not the route map. Me. The old silver light between us made it impossible to hide in politeness. Shock, I said, because if I did not begin with the smallest truth I might choke on the larger one. Then pain. A shadow of weary understanding crossed his face. And after that? He asked. I stepped close enough that the answer could not be mistaken for rhetoric. Resolve. Something in him answered. Not a smile. Not relief. The recognition of a vow not yet spoken aloud and already shaping the air. The ruin groaned above us again, louder this time. Marcus shouted, now. Julian offered his hand. I took it. Together we stepped back through the open chamber door just as the silver script in the air thinned into one final line and held it for us alone. The road remembers who answered. Then the black crystal dimmed and the chamber began to close behind us.